Thank you so much for joining us on this virtual field trip as we head to the Battle of Fort Fisher. But before we jump into that battle, we have to understand what's going on with the U.S. as a whole. So take a look at this map. This is what the United States kind of looked like in 1861. So the North, which are the blue states, are also known as the Union, and the South are going to be the pink states. Those are known as the Confederacy. So the two were fighting over slavery. The Union wanted to abolish slavery, and the South wanted to keep it. And a lot of it had to do with the economic state of the North and the South. The North did not have the soil for large plantations like the South did, so the North became more industrial and felt slavery was dying out. However, much like today, the South had better soil and the climate that made it ideal for them to have those large plantations and those large farms to grow crops like tobacco and cotton. The southern states were not as advanced and industrial as the North, so they relied on their agriculture and felt slavery was a benefit to their economic way of life. So they wanted to not only keep slavery, but they wanted to expand it into the Western territory. Because of all this fighting between the North and the South, the southern states actually wanted to break away and become the Confederate States of America, but the North did not want that. But this was what was leading up to kick off the Civil War. Stepping outside the Fort Fisher historic site, this is exactly what we see. Back in 1865, this is exactly what was there. And our tour guide is going to explain how these changes occurred over the past 150 years.
You see where the white roof is? Okay, that would be the end of the fort at the time of the battle. Okay? Now, what you have here is an airstrip that they cut for World War II. Now, the other thing that's changed, you see all the live oaks here? And live oaks there inside the fort, all coastal live oaks. None of those would have been here at the time of the battle. It would have been all clear cut. So they had a clear field of fire from the fort. And so all that would have been bare and kind of a moonscape looking thing. The palisade fence that you see there, that would have also run from the river to the ocean. And again, that was like a secondary thing of defense.
Definitely a second line of defense. Look how tall and big this fence is. I'm close to 6 feet tall, and you can see that this fence has at least 3 additional feet above me stretching to that point. This fence stretched from the river all the way down into the ocean. Take a look at this picture. You can see kind of where the fence curves back and forth. The tour guide is going to explain the benefit those curves had to those Confederate soldiers.
If you're the Union Army attacking and it zigzags, they can fire on you sideways and what they call enfilading fire, which is coming in from the side. So you're going to be fired on from 2 different directions.
The Confederates were also one of the first to use landmines.
The area that we're walking over right now was, at the time of the battle, a minefield. One of the first uses of a minefield anywhere in the world. And what these were, they weren't the kind of mines today like you step and detonate. What they were was torpedoes. We've got examples of them out in the visitor center there. They were buried underneath the ground with electrical wires going back into the fort, controlled by a guy whose title was the electrician.
Wilmington, North Carolina had become the Confederacy's last connection to trade, being a port city. Since the South did not have the industrial power the Union did, they relied on trading their crops with Great Britain in exchange for war supplies. The Union knew this was one of the last ports that the Confederacy had going into the end of the Civil War, so they planned the attack on Fort Fisher to take over the Confederacy's last port. Fort Fisher, which is at the end of Curie Beach, has Cape Fear River on one side and the Atlantic Ocean on the other. The Union's naval fleet, which was led by a man who you're looking at in the upper right-hand corner by the name of General Benjamin Butler, came up with a surprise attack on Christmas Eve night. He thought that sending the USS Louisiana, that was carrying 25 tons of gunpowder, close enough to Fort Fisher that when it was detonated, it would be a devastating blow to the fort. However, the Union miscalculated the ship, and it was more than a mile off the coast when it was detonated. All it did was wake up the troops, and no damage was done to the fort. But the Union did not back down. The next morning, they began their bombardment.
20,000 shells into the fort.
From the first battle.
First battle and in the second battle. But now, if you wonder what 20,000 shells is like, at the time of the battles, at the height of the firing, they would come in 115 shells a minute coming in at the height of the battle. Okay, so I mean that's a lot.
Shells of like.
Just these are shells being fired from the 600 cannon blockading ships out there in the ocean.
The positioning of the flagpole that you see on the right-hand side of your screen is crucial into the reasoning why the Union was unable to take Fort Fisher in the first battle. Instead of this flagpole being in the center of Fort Fisher, where they normally fly it, it was moved to the edge. Therefore, it threw off the Union as they were sending their shots into Fort Fisher. So instead of hitting the fort, they actually overshot their landing, and then their shells landed in the Cape Fear River. Then when the Union approached Fort Fisher on foot, they realized very little damage had been done. In fact, only 4 out of the 40 cannons were destroyed. What was damaged was the barracks that the Confederate soldiers stayed. So the next few weeks, many of the soldiers actually slept in the bunkers where they kept the ammunition for the cannons. The main cause for this battle was the fight over slavery, and there was a lot of African American soldiers who actually were fighting with the Union at the time of the Battle of Fort Fisher. Our tour guide is going to explain the significance of how the Union decided to use their troops.
Initially, the way they used them was they would go ahead and often put them in first, like they did in the movie Glory in Petersburg. They'd be the first troops in. They end up getting slaughtered. The troops going behind them, they get slaughtered too sometimes. This is one of the first battle where they reversed that. And they actually were the third wave into the fort, taking only 6 casualties. And they were used strategically as opposed to just being put out there as cannon fodder. So it was kind of showing some changing views here. I think that's important.
For the second battle at Fort Fisher, they returned with a new leader who you're looking at right here, General Alfred Terry. Now, unlike the previous attack, this one was calculated, and the majority of the shots the Union took hit their mark, and only 4 cannons were left usable inside Fort Fisher. And even though Fort Fisher was sturdy, it had a winding fence and even landmines, it was not enough to keep the Union away. The Union soldiers entered here, having to cross the marsh, which caused many of them to slip and fall. This entrance into Fort Fisher is known as the Bloody Gate. The Confederate soldiers placed field artillery at the gate to open fire on the soldiers as they entered. However, the Union numbers were too large, and the Confederates could not load the artillery fast enough. Once the Union entered the fort, they fought face to face. The Union easily outnumbered the Confederates by thousands. The Union was named victorious, and they seized the South's last open seaport on the Atlantic coast. A few months later, the Civil War ended, and the Union was named victorious over the Civil War, and the 13th Amendment was passed, which abolished slavery.